Thank you all for being here. I will today present the main findings from a paper I was an author on that was quite recently published, which is called Striving for Open Science Compliance in Sweden, Achieved Goals and Remaining Challenges. Let me go further. Yes, so this was the publication in Nordic Perspectives on Open Science, and I wasn't of course, the main initiator of this initiative. That credit goes to Sabina Anderberg and Jessica Lindvall. And then together with our co-authors, we analyzed data that we got from SUHF and wrote this paper. So it's a collaboration between several institutions that you can see here on the right side. And we've decided to take this initiative because we're all institutions that want to further open science implementation in Sweden. And together, kind of with SUHF, we're hoping to do that with this paper. So we started from Sweden's commitments to open science. I'm not going to do a lot of background on open science, so some kind of basic knowledge is kind of expected. But yeah, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand or unmute yourself. But we start from Sweden's commitments to open science, and it's been already almost 10 years, or a bit more actually than 10 years now with these commitments. So in 2012, the European Commission took forward the recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information. And in response to that, the Swedish government tasked the Swedish Research Council with developing national guidelines for open access to publications and data. So in 2015, Vetenskapsrådet published a proposal outlining a 10-year vision for this. Then in 2016, these ambitions from Research Council were kind of formalized in the 2016 Research Bill. So that was the first time that the government really set a target that all publicly funded research should be published with immediate open access by 2021. And research data should be made accessible as open as possible, as close as necessary by 2026. And these ambitions were kind of reiterated in the research bills that came thereafter in 2020 and 2024. So to operationalize these, the Swedish government tasked the National Library of Sweden with kind of the work, coordinating work on open access, and the Research Council was tasked with coordinating work on open data. Then in 2021, UNESCO published their recommendation on open science, and in Sweden, SUHF published the roadmap for open science specifically for higher education institutions. So that's kind of a guideline for how universities can implement the goals that are being set in Sweden for open science. And then in 2024, we got the national guidelines for open science from the library. So this is all to say that the ambitions in Sweden are there. They're aligned with European ambitions. They've been taken up by the government and by big coordinating organizations in Sweden. So you would say from a policy and strategy perspective, that we are aligned with Europe and that we should be kind of leading the way in implementing open science. But we've seen in Sweden that kind of, despite the clarity and the ambition of the policy framework that we have, the implementation has been a bit slower than we would wish. So the goals for all publicly funded research being immediate open access in 2021 and the research data in 2026 have not been met. So this means that we see a slight discrepancy between what are the actual policy objectives and the practical implementation within higher education of these policy objectives. So that was the main question that we want to answer with this paper, like where does this discrepancy come from? So to do that, we took the yearly university survey that's conducted by SUHF. So this is a survey that is sent out every year to all higher education institutions by Sweden that measures how far they have come with implementing open science. And in the paper, there's 3 years of data, but recently the data from 2026 were also released. So I've updated the analysis, and now there's 4 years of data that I will show you today. So it's not exactly what it says in the paper, but it's an updated version. So within this survey, it's formed around the 10 recommendations that are in the roadmap for open science by SUHF, and the 10 recommendations are subdivided into 38 action proposals from the national roadmap. So for each action proposal, the higher education institution has to answer how far they have come with implementing this. So they have 4 alternatives. It's either we haven't started yet, not initiated, or we've started but not finished yet, we've completed it, or I don't know for our institution. And then to kind of complement this analysis a bit, we've also compared the data that we have to the national monitoring initiatives that already exist in Sweden. So we've compared them to the following 5 national monitoring initiatives. From the Royal Library, there is a yearly survey or a yearly composition of how far in Sweden we have come with open access to scientific publications. And they have done a one-time survey and analysis on open educational resources and on public engagement in science. These were done in 2023. And then the Research Council does a yearly follow-up on the work with open access to research data. So I've taken one from 2025, and Wetenskap och Allmänhet has done a one-time kind of setting together all of the knowledge that we have in Sweden surrounding citizen science. And that's I think it's not really a one-time, but it's maybe every 3 or 4 years they kind of publish reports around this. So then we move on to the analysis. So first we have the number of respondents. So the peak was in 2025 with 34 higher education institutions responding. And this year, unfortunately, it went down a bit again with only 30. So in total, there were 39 institutions that participated. I excluded 2 of them because they only answered 1 year of the 4 years. So that way you can't really compare any improvements or not. So 37 institutions are represented in this analysis. Then there is within every institution, of course, kind of designated people that answer this questionnaire, and there is a variation in who specifically answers it. So in almost 50% of the answers, it's different people every year that answer the questionnaire. So this can lead to some variation, of course, some interpretation of the questions, and some maybe different people have different knowledge of what is happening within their university. So of course, the answers are all self-reported. So this means that there's, of course, the answers are not perfect, and there's some level of variation that comes from this. And then there's also variation in roles that the respondents have within their university. So some are library leadership, some are library staff, some are roughly kind of research data and open science support. And then there's some university leadership that answers the questionnaire. And we've also seen some variation throughout the years with kind of the slice of the pie of who answers what. So this, of course, also leads to some variation because, of course, in the library working, you'll have maybe different knowledge than being university leadership. Notwithstanding all of this, we still think these results that we got are useful. It's the best we have at the moment in Sweden. We don't have any other ways of monitoring how far open science has been implemented. So yeah, this paper is kind of just to make do with what we have to the best of our abilities. Okay, then we go to the results, and I first wanted to kind of see if it's true that there are policies, are strategies being developed, how far, we know at a national level we have the government setting policies, SUHF and the library, but at a higher education institution level, are there also strategies being developed? So there are three action points within the roadmap for open science that our higher education institutions are asked for. And that's to establish a strategic function for open science within the university, make strategic governance documents, and divide responsibilities internally for open science. So then we go to the first plot. So here in this radar plot, you see the three recommendations here, 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. And then you see how much the percentage of higher education institutions that have reported completed for these recommendations. So this is only if they say they have fully completed the work with this recommendation. And these are the percentages in 2023. So we see that a quarter of universities has a strategic function for open science, but it's less for the government's documents and the internal division of responsibilities. Then when we look at 2026, we see that a lot has happened, luckily, throughout the years. So now it's almost half that has a strategic function and government's documents. And there's still some to be desired for the internal division of responsibilities. Then I think it's interesting also to not just look at universities that say they have completed it, but also universities that say they have at least started to work with this, because that's an indication of where we will be in the coming few years, hopefully. So if we look at that, now I've made the sum of, so the total number of universities that say they have completed it, but also initiated it. And there we see in 2023 that there's almost 3/4 uptake for all three recommendations. And in 2026, this is even more. So here for recommendation 1.3 and 1.2, we have near 100% uptake of universities working with this. So this is a very good sign, and hopefully in the next coming years, these strategies will be completed and the kind of completion rate will follow. So as a conclusion, we do see that there's the reported completion and initiation rate for the OS strategy, so policy development within higher education institutions, is close to 100%. So it seems that the universities are following the government and actually putting open science policies in place. Then the next, of course, is the practice. So are these policies actually implemented or not? And I will go through the policies like the different practices like we did in the paper that we published. And there we ordered them according to how the practices are being ordered in the national guidelines for open science. So we will look at open access to publications, open access to research data, open research methods, open educational resources, public engagement in science, and infrastructure supporting open science. So there's a lot of practices, of course, that are involved in open science. It's a very big area, and there's many things to change. So we will go through all of them. So first, open access, which is probably the thing that the open science movement started with and the most well-known one. And there are several action points that SUHF has said universities need to do to implement this. So the first one is support a transition to not publishing anymore in either subscription journals or hybrid journals, provide information about licensing, promote knowledge of copyright retention for scientists so that they don't hand over the copyright to publishers, And then the recommendations with the stars, they are new in the roadmap, so they haven't been added in 2023, but I think they've been added in 2025. So we only have 2 years of monitoring. And they are developed strategies for publishing longer formats. So, for example, books. So how do we publish those open access and promote open publishing platforms? So that would be, for example, now Open Research Europe, which is now being made open for all publications. So here we see again which universities have reported completion of these recommendations. So again, there's definitely progress between 2023, which is in the orange, and 2026, which is in the blue. Um, Universities report a lot of work with information about licensing, also promoting knowledge of copyright retention. Just the publishing platforms and the books are still lagging behind a bit. Then if we see also what universities reporting to being like work is underway, they're having started work on these recommendations. Then we see nearly 100%, or actually 100%, for supporting the transition to no subscription-based publishing or hybrid publishing. Also near 100% for licensing, copyright retention, but again, the strategies for publishing longer formats and open publishing platforms lags behind a little bit. So as a conclusion, basically what I said, there's a lot of work to support a publishing landscape going away from to support kind of full gold and diamond open access instead of hybrid open access. But more work can be done for figuring out how to make books open access and promote open publishing platforms. Then if we compare this to the other monitoring that's going on, so here I've taken the recent data from the Royal Library that just recently has been published in May. So the universities that support the transition away from hybrid open access, they mainly do so through the BIPSAM agreements that the Royal Library is coordinating. And in their report, they actually say now that in 2025, 81% of Sweden published articles were made immediate open access, which is pretty good, although it's leveled off during the past years. So it kind of remains steadily around 80% now. But 44% of these are still in hybrid journals. So you see here around 37% is now in gold open access and then 44 in hybrid, which means that the libraries pay article processing charges to actually make specific articles open access. And that's next to also paying for a subscription to that journal. So that means that there's still a way to go there, of course. Also, the total publishing expenditures remain at roughly 1.5% of higher education revenue. So this is throughout the years. Also, keeping inflation into account, it has remained quite steady. So even if we want to move away from hybrid publishing, the expenditures don't really mirror this yet. So in this report, the library also themselves, they write kind of the leveling off of these costs suggests that read and publish agreements in their present form are not the way forward. Diamond open access, open publishing platforms, and rights retention measures appear to be complementary and concrete ways forward. So there's still a lot of work to be done also within open access. Okay, then moving forward, we go to open data. So that's work that's monitored by Wetenskapsrådet. And within the roadmap for open science, there are several recommendations. So within the universities, data management plans should be implemented. There should be a deepened knowledge of FAIR principles, establish forums for knowledge exchange. So if researchers want to kind of share with each other their practices and learn from each other, this should be promoted by the university and supported. And then again, a new recommendation is also promoting the sharing of other kind of data adjacent outputs. such as source code and software. So we see again for completion, reported completion rates, that again, luckily, quite a lot has happened between 2023 and 2026. So data management plans have been implemented by almost 50% of universities. Also, has a lot work been going on with deepening knowledge of FAIR principles, but establishing actual forums for knowledge exchange and promoting the sharing of other resources such as source code is again lagging behind a bit. Then when we see what universities are working with, it's again 100% for DMPs, which is great. And also a lot with the FAIR principles. So hopefully the completion rate will increase quite a lot over the next few years. And universities are also working with establishing these forums and not for knowledge exchange, but it's still around 50% that hasn't started with this yet. The same for the sharing of source code and software. So for open data, we can conclude that the work is doing very well with implementing data management plans. Of course, actually following up and monitoring if the data management plans are being put in place and being followed by researchers is a different thing, which is the same for sharing FAIR data. But we can see from this analysis that more work can be done with open access for sharing other research outputs like code and software and establishing forums for knowledge exchange. So again, when we compare it with other national monitoring, like I already said, it's hard to know in Sweden at the moment how much research outputs data is actually made openly available because there's not really a national monitoring for this. So within the annual reports that the Research Council publishes, there is one question that asks how much of the organization's research data is actually being assessed for open access. And then of the research data that is being assessed, how much of that is actually being made openly available. And of the responding universities, 0% actually fully fulfills these criteria, but that's mainly due to them saying that it's just not possible to make an estimate of assessments for openness at the moment. So yeah, whether there is actually more data being shared in Sweden is hard to know at the moment. So I took some numbers from SND's annual report of DORIS. So how many data sets are submitted to DORIS? And there we see definitely a steep increase from around 2011 onwards, and it's still increasing every year. And now we have researchdata.se, of course, that scrapes from that kind of aggregates metadata from several repositories in Sweden. So hopefully we will get better monitoring and numbers in the future of how much data is actually made openly available. Then we move on to open methods. And this is a bit of a tricky one. So in the guidelines, it states that the priorities for implementing open methods is, for example, sharing protocols or workflows or software under open licenses, and also providing institutional support to researchers for this. But in the roadmap, there's not actually a section on open research methods at all. So this is not being monitored at all at the moment, how much of protocols are actually being shared openly. So the closest recommendation I found within the roadmap is that is a recommendation 2, and that offers some insight kind of into the support that researchers are getting for implementing open methods. Yeah, so that's kind of what I chose to go for here. It's not really the same as the open methods, but at least we get a measure of how the researchers are actually being supported with this. So there is a recommendation on support for data management, but then also upskilling, so education at the doctoral level and upskilling at the undergraduate level. So here we see support for data management has increased, almost doubled within the past 4 years, which is great. And also upskilling at the doctoral level has been completed at a much higher level in 2026 and 2023. Upskilling at the undergraduate level there's almost zero uptake, and it hasn't increased at all over the past years. Then when we look both at completion and initiation rates, we see that there's 100% uptake. So every university that's responded has now started working with support for data management, and also close to 100% has started with at least implementing some upskilling at the doctoral level. At the undergraduate level, there is, again, definitely a lag. There's about a quarter of universities that have started with this, but that means that 75% has not even started with implementing this. So as a conclusion for open methods, it's not possible in Sweden at the moment to estimate to what extent protocols, etc., are being shared, just because there's no monitoring at all going on. There's work completed or underway to implement research support for data management and open science education at doctoral level, but there's more work to be done on an undergraduate level. Then we go to open educational resources, which is the next one in the guidelines. And there's a lot of recommendations with this. So it's within the institution's established goals and strategy for open educational resources, also an incentive structure, support. Then there's a new recommendation that wants universities to implement educational licensing specifically for open educational resources, also in regards to the teachers' exemption, specifically in Sweden. It's resources for actually creating and sharing open educational resources and collaborating both nationally and internationally for this. So in general, this recommendation has the honor of being the one with the lowest completion rates of all recommendations that are being surveyed. So you see there's very little completion, very little progress within the past 4 years. Or that's 3 years, sorry, because this recommendation was first added in 2024, not 2023. And then we also see the initiation rates, although they are higher than the completion rates, there's not so much progress being made at the moment. And there's still at least 50% of institutions have not started work on any of these recommendations. So for the open educational resources, there's still a lot of work to be done with, making strategy, incentives, support, basically all recommendations at the moment. Yes, so that's basically that. And then to compare that with national monitoring, this is the survey I said that the university did in 2023. And it's the only national follow-up to date with regards to open educational resources in Sweden. So they also conclude there's no monitoring. They see some growth in usage of open educational resources, and they say that inadequate awareness seems to be the biggest barrier. So here they asked higher education institutions if they follow up the use of open educational resources. And again, by far the biggest percentage says no. Are there any policy documents? It's no. Have you received information about open educational resources from the library? It's also no. And yeah, in general, the uptake of this is very low. So there's still a lot of work to be done and ground to be gained with this. Then we go on to public engagement in science, the next area. So within the national guidelines, this is very well described. There are some priorities that are mentioned. So it mentions develop principles and methods for public involvement, provide researchers with training in this and support, and coordinate with funders to actually also support the co-creation across disciplines. And in Sweden, of course, we have the third mission. So officially, higher education institutions are supposed to actively work with involving the public in science. So in the roadmap, there's only one recommendation and one action point regarding public engagement in science. And that's recommendation 10.1, promote the awareness of the principles and methods for how the public can be involved in the research process. And this one has been added in 2025. Sorry for the low resolution on this image. So we only have 2 years of this. We see that at least a lot of universities report having started with this work. And there's like a tiny sliver here that report that they have completed work on this recommendation, but it's still over a quarter that doesn't work with this at all. So there's definitely also some more work to be done here. Then comparing this to another national monitoring from the Royal Library, they've done this in 2023. They published the report on public engagement in science. There they also asked, are there policy documents? To which a lot of higher education institutions respond no or don't know. So again, the same as for open educational resources. There's some room for policy to be developed within this area. And then when they ask, why are you not involved in engaging the public in science? The primary reasons are lacking resources or just knowledge or policies. So it does indicate that still policy development could solve some problems also in this area, but they also need education and just plain resources, funding, and time. And then are you giving skills development? More than half answers no. So again, this is there. This indicates there could be more education in this area. Then, of course, within public engagement in science, there's a wide variety of how the public can be involved. So we have simply science communication, but we also have citizen science. And at the moment, there's not really, at least in the roadmap and the guidelines, there's not so much of a distinction between this. So there's no monitoring by SUHF, at least, on how much science communication is being done, but also how much citizen science is being done. So one monitoring initiative is done by Wetenskap och Allmänhet, and that's done specifically for citizen science, and it's the only one we have in Sweden at the moment. So in 2023, they published a big report, which is kind of a knowledge oversight accumulation regarding citizen science. And they refer to data that they already published in 2019. So this is the amount of Swedish researchers that have actually heard about citizen science. And here more than half says no. This was, of course, 7 years ago, so it might have increased by now. And this question is, how positive are you in general towards citizen science? So here at least you see that more than half is positive or very positive towards citizen science. And then when they actually have done citizen science, had a project in which they involved citizens, how have they actually done it? So 61% responded, we haven't had a project with citizen science. But the next biggest bar here is that they have, and then they've involved citizens with actually collecting data. There's some for collaboration and communication, or coming up with project ideas or project questions. So this gives an overview of what is still to be worked with within citizen science. Of course, not every project in research is suitable to even involve citizens in, but it gives an overview of where work can still be done. So at the moment, there's no kind of national recurring monitoring for public engagement in science. So more work can be done on strategy development, research allocation support for researchers, and more work can be done on recognizing different forms of public engagement in science. Then the final recommendation in the guidelines, which is in infrastructures. So the national guidelines kind of highlight that there needs to be coordinated funding for open science infrastructures. and the development of e-infrastructures in Sweden as well. And the roadmap highlights actions with establishing e-infrastructures for data management and also interconnect the existing e-infrastructure. So that's, for example, electronic lab journals and data management plans and e-archive to have them all interconnected. So we have from project start to finish, you have kind of a way that you can go through the e-infrastructure. Then there's a recommendation for securing long-term funding and governance for these e-infrastructures, and a new recommendation, which is to contribute to development and the finance of these open science infrastructures. So the completion rates that institutions report is quite low, but there is some progress between 2023 and 2026, specifically for data management e-infrastructures. The other ones, this one, the interconnection remains at 0%, and these remain very low. Then when we see what institutions have started work with, it's almost 100%. Are they putting together e-infrastructure for data management? And almost half of them are working with interconnecting research infrastructures, but it's not really increased over the years. And then with the funding and governments, it's about 50 to 75% that are working with this. So as a conclusion, again, work is completed or underway to make a e-infrastructure for data management, but the other recommendations, more work can be done. So then we've done all the areas of open science that are mentioned in the guidelines, but for the paper, we then thought that in the guidelines, there's not so much mentioned about research assessment reform, while that is actually arguably the most important for implementations of open science. And it's also a system-wide area that needs to be changed within Sweden. So in the paper, we've added this one as well, also because there's some recommendations in the national roadmap, which with regards to research assessment reform as well. So they advise that within universities, assessment criteria need to be revised. There needs to be support developed for quality control. There needs to be guidance provided to experts to actually implement this revised assessment criteria. And there needs to be a development of new discipline-specific assessment methods. So then when we look at completion rates, they're very, very low, almost zero, also in 2026. Of course, we know that, or we can expect that work is underway. So at the last time I checked, there were 37 Swedish funders, but also nonprofits and universities that have signed COARA. And this is also reflected in what universities report in the survey. But yeah, this, of course, when an entity signs COARA, they have to make an action plan, and then it takes time to implement that. So hopefully this completion rates will increase in the coming years. When we see the initiation rates, again, it's luckily much higher. So almost 50% of universities report to be working with the revision of assessment criteria. And also the other three action points. So again, hopefully here we will see some real change in the next few years. As a conclusion, again, there is engagement with research assessment reform, mainly through COARA, but there's more work to be done in actually materializing this change, like making revisions of the assessment and then actually materializing this and implementing it. So that was a lot of data to go through. Now we've reached the final conclusion. So we've gone through most of the areas in open science, at least all of the ones that are mentioned in the guidelines, plus the research assessment reform. And from this, at least what we in the paper have concluded, this is a lot of text, But it is that there are substantial advances in policy developments in most areas, not in open educational resources and science communication, for example. Um, but these advances seem to not have consistently translated into measurable outcomes. So, for example, reduced reliance on hybrid publishing, increased sharing of fair research data, and also sharing of other research output, open educational resources. So, in some areas, there's limited monitoring, weak incentives, and still insufficient training that kind of constrains the actual practical uptake. So it seems, and we concluded that the core challenge for open science is not really in the absence of policy or the absence of ambition, but kind of in the last mile of actually sustainably and in a coordinated way implementing the policies. So to do that in the paper, we recommend 5 specific actions going forward in Sweden. So this is to make a defined shared national vision. So that's kind of merging all the different policies and roadmaps and guidelines that there are at the moment and making sure that everyone's on board with them and also make sure we have measurable objectives so we can actually monitor if we're actually making progress or not. Build robust and coordinated infrastructures. This is already underway, but we need to make a sustained effort to actually link all of them and make sure that it supports researchers throughout their entire project lifecycle. Then I think one very important thing is that there needs to be a sustained investment and capacity. So that basically just means sustained funding. Right now, open science is often done in project-based, how do we say that? Project groups that have kind of a limited time to work on a specific problem and a limited amount of money. And when we compare that to, for example, the Netherlands, we see they have Open Science NL, which is kind of an established long-term funded body that can actually help implement policies. Sorry, two more before I say thank you. Then we need to also for researchers have development of skills and training across the research lifecycle. So it's one thing to say to researchers, this is the policy and we want you to make a data management plan. But of course, it's also up to higher education institutions and also research infrastructures to provide training in this so researchers know how to implement it. And then very important also is to align the incentive and research assessment. Of course, researchers are very busy. They have a million things going on. So it's very understandable that if the incentives and assessment is not there, then it's very hard to actually implement the ambitious policies that Sweden has. And with that, I say thank you so much for listening. That was a long, much data thrown at you, but I'm happy to have some discussion and see if there's any questions. I will stop sharing for now.